All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sam. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I am the Member Experience Manager at adventco-working. I want to thank you all for joining us for our Advent Member Talks. This weekly program gives our Advent members the opportunity to Skillshare with fellow members as well as with the greater Charlotte community. And so each week we feature a different member on a topic of their choosing. So today we're joined by Advent member Kate Wells. Kate is the author of A Forecast for Health, Understanding Your Potential for Lifelong Wellness. She has over 10 years experience running and growing clinical laboratories that do hormone testing. And so tonight she'll be discussing what hormone imbalance can look like and what you can do to make it better. So if you have any questions, please, if you're joining us on Zoom, go ahead and post those in the Q&A, or if you're on Facebook, just comment, and we'll make sure that we leave time for that at the end. So Kate, I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so you guys can hopefully see what I'm going to talk about. So, as Sam mentioned, as a businesswoman, I spend a lot of time working in the field of hormone balancing, and I recognize that a lot of people, although they have a general idea about hormones, there's a whole lot of gaps in there, and that was kind of behind the reason for me writing the book. And so I want to share some of those basics with you today. So the hormones that we're going to talk about are primarily estrogens and progesterone, but they're nestled in the other steroid hormones, including testosterone, DHEA or dihydroepiandrosterone, and cortisol. The last two of those, of course, are stress hormones. And so, it's a whole nother topic to talk about how those come into play. So here's the average, a pictorial diagram of the menstrual cycle. I'm going to use this as a framework for understanding what goes on. So we have the calendar across the bottom over the course of the month. Then we have testosterone, progesterone, estradiol levels, and then we have, Then we have on the yellow arrow, it's how the egg is working over time, and then what's happening to the uterine lining. Now, day one in the cycle, that's when the uterine lining begins to shed. The levels of estrogen are fairly low. By the time that finishes, around day 5 or 6, then we begin to see estradiol beginning to increase. Now, as that happens, the uterine lining is beginning to develop, which you can see again on that lower level, as does the developing follicle that's going to appear, hopefully sometime in the next few days. So around day 12, progesterone levels are starting to rise. By day 14, the rising estradiol levels start signaling luteinizing hormone, and that will in turn signal the release of the follicle from the ovary. At that point, the ovum starts its journey along the fallopian tube. By day 15, the uterine lining is continuing to thicken, ready for an egg that's going to, potentially implant. The corpus luteum, which is the packing around the egg, makes estradiol, and it also makes progesterone to signal the endometrium cells to stop growing and mature and strengthen the structure necessary for that newly fertilized egg to implant. Progesterone levels are normally the highest at 7 to 8 days after ovulation. Now, by the end of the cycle, if there isn't implantation and the egg begins to degrade, then estradiol and progesterone levels are dropping, and then we get to the end of the cycle, and then there's a period happens again. So how this can change. These are the areas that we're going to look at as to how this pattern can change. What are some of the things that can happen that impact hormone levels? So first of all, polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is a condition linked to the way the body processes insulin after it's been produced by the pancreas to regulate blood sugar. A high-carb diet over time can dysregulate the body's ability to manage insulin. And the cells themselves actually become resistant to insulin. So when this happens, insulin no longer can be easily absorbed into the cells and used for energy. This means insulin levels rise. And so when insulin rise, the ovaries and the adrenal gland are actually stimulated to produce higher levels of testosterone. And that elevated level of testosterone can turn off the signaling for the ovaries to release an egg. So you still get the egg that's in the development process, but it isn't stimulated to be released. And so you end up with a growing number of eggs that are sitting in the ovary that have partially developed, but not being released. And that situation is called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And somebody with polycystic ovarian syndrome can have trouble with fertility if they are hoping to conceive. Now, this diagram shows that things all go to hell in a handbasket. Once you're not ovulating, once that progesterone isn't being released, as that orange level shows. Look at that estrogen, the progesterone level, it's much lower. Now, if the endometrium isn't signaled to mature, sometimes it can just begin to release early. And so cycles can get shorter and shorter. But sometimes without that signaling from progesterone to kind of enrich the lining still further and anchor it, estrogen will continue to allow the lining to grow, and eventually cycles can lengthen. So here are some of the hormone changes, the things that we see when hormones change. I mean, there's so many symptoms here. We tend to think about mood swings and irritability and depression and, maybe irregular periods, but there is all sorts going on once you begin to get that dysregulation between high estrogen and progesterone. These are two that need to work in partnership all the time, and it pretty much starts going to hell in a handbasket when those are out of balance. I like this diagram because during pregnancy, you can see the progesterone levels are going up and up and up and up through the second and third trimester. But after delivery, there is a really quick drop in progesterone. It's almost like this progesterone withdrawal. And postpartum depression can occur for quite a large number of women, and it can be due in part to that really quick drop in progesterone. So if you know someone who's recently had a baby and is struggling with progesterone with postpartum depression, it could be to do with the fact that they have just had this sudden drop in progesterone that's really impacting their mood. The key thing about progesterone is that it has an influence on the neurotransmitter GABA. And GABA is one of those neurotransmitters that helps calm us down and is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Now, this is actually one of my favorite diagrams of all time related to hormones. I love this diagram because it shows what's happening to progesterone and estradiol over time. Around 35, we begin to see a drop in both estradiol and progesterone. However, progesterone is dropping much faster. The number of eggs that are sitting in the ovary trying to develop, they're all still there, but it's harder for them to develop. And so from about age 35 onwards, women can miss ovulation on an increasing basis. And without ovulation, you're not getting that progesterone, which is counterbalancing estrogen. So you end up in a situation that's called estrogen dominance, where you have way too much progesterone, estradiol in relation to progesterone. So let's go back to these symptoms again. because we're not ovulating as often, if we have delayed having babies, it can be harder to get pregnant. Because those eggs are having a harder time developing, there is an increased risk of birth defects. Our cycles can get more irregular, they can get shorter, they can get longer, they can get much heavier. And without progesterone has a kind of muscle relaxant effect. So as that uterine lining is continuing to build, because we still have plenty of estrogen, without progesterone, once it sheds, the cramping that can occur as that uterine lining is breaking down, we can get higher levels of cramping without that progesterone as a muscular relaxant. Aldosterone is another hormone that is involved. I'll come back to that one in a little bit. But breast health, I really want to touch on this. Estrogen is a hormone that's made primarily in the ovaries. It's important for sexual development and other bodily functions from the first monthly period until menopause. It will stimulate breast cells. A higher lifetime exposure to estrogen may increase breast cancer risk. Progesterone, as we know, is that natural counterbalance. It is a regulator of the cell growth that comes from the presence of estrogen. And it's made mainly in the ovaries, but as we know, we rely on it at ovulation. With no ovulation, we don't have enough progesterone. So we can supplement with progesterone, and somebody who is experiencing the tender breast situation that you can often get with too much estrogen, you can put that progesterone cream on the surface of breast tissue to help reduce pressure, but it's really important not to do that for too long, because the cells will just absorb that progesterone and it will sit there, and you really want it being distributed of the skin, so that it can be delivered elsewhere. So making sure that we don't end up estrogen dominant is important for a whole number of symptoms here. Progesterone supplementation, as I mentioned, can be a good idea. It can reduce the impact of fibrocystic breasts. When you're working with a practitioner to supplement with progesterone, we would always recommend that you're using bioidentical. You're putting a hormone into your body that matches exactly the hormone that your body would make naturally. So by using progesterone, you are potentially balancing out the risk of too much estrogen in the breast tissue. And if there's any family history of breast cancer, it's a really good idea to make sure that you're getting your hormones checked regularly to know if you are becoming estrogen dominant and whether it would be a good idea to use progesterone. Oh, my slide has stopped moving. Just bear with me, my slides got stuck. I'm not sure what's happening here. Here we go. So when we think about the menopausal transition, when we're actually beyond perimenopause and approaching menopause, it's not sudden. It's not something that happens overnight. It's really a phase of transition. Gradually, the cycles will lengthen, or the gaps between the periods can get longer. Some women will have a period every 3 to 4 months for a while. Others just simply stop. Someone who is supplementing with progesterone, for example, days like 8 through 28 can actually have a high degree of control over this time. The regular signaling that comes from progesterone can not only regulate cycles, but it can also help diminish the frequency of symptoms like hot flashes. It's what everybody knows about, and most women should really dread. Hot flashes are most visible during the day, but they also happen at night a lot, and that can begin to interfere with sleep. And at that point, everything's going to hell in a handbasket if you're not sleeping right. So let's go back to this diagram, and I want to think about around age like mid-50s and 60s onwards. Finally, we've got a closer gap between progesterone and estradiol. But at this point, there are a whole new set of symptoms. Women are living up to 30 years or more beyond beyond menopause. That's when we were kind of genetically programmed to die off. And yet our longer lifespans mean that we are living longer and longer without adequate hormones. And at this point, low estrogen symptoms will kick in. Symptoms like hot flashes or vaginal dryness, low body temperature, thin skin, painful intercourse, incontinence, increased frequency of urinary tract infections. I bet you're all going to run out and slate the wrists at this point. It's a whole set of surprises are still in store. But the good news is that there are solutions for this. Once there's a number of ways that we can approach managing these symptoms. One is to maintain the health of the vaginal tissue, and estriol, the weakest of the three estrogens, is a really good solution for that. But let's think a little bit about hormone supplementation. I will be the first person to say, and this isn't just because I've spent a lot of time working in clinical laboratories, but any supplementation should always be preceded by testing. You have to know where you are in order to know if you need supplement, and in which case, by how much. Testing establishes the baseline, and a provider will then work with that. It's particularly important if someone is considering the use of estradiol if there is a family history of hormone-mediated breast cancer. Now, there's a lot of debate still rages about how long to use hormone replacement therapy, and even surprisingly, the debate between synthetic and bioidentical, and that's really a topic for another discussion. We know that estrogen plays a role in over 400 processes in the body, and as does progesterone. Women don't start needing these hormones just because they're no longer reproducing. And the two hormones that we think about are estradiol, or E2, and estriol, or E3. Estradiol is the stronger hormone and should always be used balanced with progesterone. Estriol is really good for vaginal health. Now, a note about cognition as well. I mentioned the 400 ways that estrogen is important in the body, but cognition is another big one. As we live longer, our culture is seeing a rapid rise in dementias and other memory issues. Hormones play a big role in cognitive function. Earlier this year, I wrote a white paper distributed to various practitioners that summarized much of the recent literature on hormones on cognition, and I'd be more than happy to share that with anybody who would like that. In just the last 6 months, I've added estradiol into my own supplementation. I don't need it every day, but if I let it go too long, my cognitive function quickly ends up in a cloud of nothingness. So this slide just illustrates a number of places that progesterone and estradiol are important in memory, especially visual memory, during verbal processing, for verbal memory. You know what it's like when you it's like, I know this word, I used to know this word, where's that word gone? That's searching for words on a frequent basis. That could potentially be related to low estrogen. So again, it's really super important to test at different stages during your life cycle. Anytime you're experiencing symptoms, you want to test. You want to know that you are in balance, and to have a conversation with your practitioner to know if there's something that you need to balance your hormones out. We have talked primarily about progesterone and estradiol today in this very feels like fast and furious presentation. But there's lots of other areas that you can work with to balance your hormones. They are very much a part of life, and there's lots of things that you can do to help manage them so that they don't drive you crazy, and so that you don't drive everybody around you crazy as well. And you can live life full of vitality. I've got a picture of my book there. There's lots more information on hormones in there. It covers a number of health-related issues that are related to aging and healthy and with vitality. So you can always ask me about that when we're ever back at Advent again. So that's my fast and furious delivery of a high-level look at hormones and how they can influence you. And I'm happy to answer any questions you've got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. That was very informative. Where can folks find your book, and what are other resources that you suggest for folks who want to learn more about this?
Well, you can just reach out to me. Just email me, or through Advent. You can. Another good resource and another way to find out a little bit more about the book. Well, it's on Facebook. You can go to Facebook for a forecast for health. But you can also go to a company called cognition.com. That is a company that I have been an owner of for a number of years. I have physician grade hormone creams that my customers are all practitioners doing this work. But there's a ton of resources on there, information that people can read up about. And clearly, I'm happy to talk about this to anyone. So if you just want to sit down with a cup of tea and ask me questions, I'm more than happy to do that.
That's great. Thank you, Kate. Well, thank you again to everyone who's joined us this evening. We hope to see you back next Tuesday at 4:30. We're going to be joined by another Advent member, Alexis Carrero, who's going to be talking about how you can pitch yourself in a job application and interview. So thank you, and hope you have a great evening.